I Scream, You Scream. I am Gina.
I'm Kathryn.
And for the month of May, we're going to be telling stories about mass hysteria while we eat some Neapolitan ice cream. So grab a spoon and let's dig in.
This is the second part of what would otherwise have been a very, very extremely long episode about the Satanic Panic. So real quick, if you haven't listened to Tuesday's episode yet, you don't technically need to, but we recommend it for optimal enjoyment. And I just realized we're like rushing through this intro so I can tell the story, and I haven't eaten my ice cream
you're
at
not
all.
going to get to eat, right? Okay, I can ad-lib. Some elevator music. I wish we had some Enya. You know that my mom hates Enya. I don't know if it's
Who hates Enya?
I think it's because my dad started playing Enya when my mom was in labor with my sister, and my mom was like, "Turn that shit off."
Well,
and so it's one of those.
Okay,
mm-hmm.
So that's like we don't hate Enya. We hate the context in which Enya was unceremoniously forced upon us.
I think I'm telling that story right. If my parents are listening and I'm wrong, real sorry.
Honestly, if your parents are listening and you're wrong, that's fine with me because I love this. I love this version of the story so much that I don't even care what the truth is, honestly. This is the one I'll be telling.
I choose to believe it, therefore it's real.
All right, so I just sucked down my ice cream. Past Kathryn was looking out and got a real small scoop. And when I say past Kathryn, I mean like 5 minutes ago. But anyway, okay, so as a quick recap for those who tuned in Tuesday and have since forgotten everything in the last day and a half, we left off at one of the most pivotal moments that most people consider like the big kahuna when it comes to the Satanic Panic and just how it all got started. And that was the 1980 publication of an allegedly nonfiction book titled Michelle Remembers. The book was co-authored by a young woman named Michelle Smith and the psychiatrist that was treating her at the time, a man named Lawrence Pazder. In this book, Michelle and Lawrence recount their experience together, uncovering Michelle's repressed memories of childhood satanic ritual abuse. In this book, Michelle and Lawrence, I just said that sentence.
That was good.
That was me playing it cool. Did you love it?
I loved it so much.
Anyway, so literally the next line says, "So what the fuck? Say more, Kathryn." Okay, so I stayed up real late writing these notes. I was like on one when I was finishing this. Part 2 gets a little unhinged. I'm sorry. So Michelle Smith was in her mid-20s and living with her husband in British Columbia, when she first came to Lawrence for therapy in 1973. I forgot to do trigger warnings again throughout the rest of the story. I don't know for sure, but I think more suicide, depression, mental health things for sure. I don't know about suicide specifically, but there's also going to be some pregnancy loss and definitely a lot of, we're going to be talking about a lot of abuse. So specifically sexual abuse. So trigger warning moving forward. So yeah, she was, at the time that she sought therapy from this Lawrence guy, she was reportedly dealing with depression, anxiety, and a lot of emotional distress. She had recently suffered a miscarriage, and her marriage had been rocky for a while, long before the pregnancy, but the loss of the pregnancy kind of amplified their issues and caused a lot of additional problems that weren't there before that kind of just piled on to the previous issues. So she was just feeling very lost and depressed and anxious. So she decided she needed to go to therapy, which kudos to her. Snaps for Michelle. We love to see it. So she would receive therapy from Lawrence for 3 years, from 1973 to 1976, before one day in 1976, she kind of just lost it in the middle of a session and could not stop screaming and crying. And it is said that it took almost a half hour for him to calm her down, like in the middle of this session. She was having just like a full-on mental breakdown. Keep in mind that Lawrence was a local psychiatrist. He did practice, therapy ethically. He was licensed. He was an MD who studied psychiatry, but he had a heavy focus on Catholicism. He was not trained in trauma or dissociation treatment in any way. And he was basically more of a spiritual psychologist. Like, his main objective was to help Catholics stay on the path, basically.
Okay.
Like, he was a religious therapist. Despite this extreme lack of credentials in trauma treatment, this breakdown that she had in his office indicated to him that she needed much deeper help than she had previously been receiving, and he decided that he wanted to be the one to help her with it. Yeah, we hate it. So he decided to begin using hypnotic regression therapy to help her uncover repressed memories that could be causing her emotional distress. And have you ever heard of hypnotic regression therapy? Because it's
I've
talked
heard
about.
of
Okay.
hypnosis as like something therapeutic you can
Okay.
like I've heard it helps you like quit smoking and things like that. That's my only real understanding of it.
Yeah. So this is something that comes up in a lot of problematic cases that are talked about a lot in this regard. So basically what it is not just hypnotic therapy, but specifically the use of hypnosis to uncover repressed memories.
Okay.
So that's, it's like a specific type of hypnotic therapy.
Does it like take you back to like mentally where you were when it was happening to try and...
So that's the theory. The technique is considered extremely controversial and highly unreliable, and by today's standards, it's considered mostly ineffective and kind of goes against modern therapeutic standards and would be considered unethical to use today. And I will say, especially compounded by, if you have no trauma treatment experience. The issue with this type of therapy is uncovering those memories relies so heavily on the way in which the questions the therapist asks are phrased. So you can very easily, when someone is under hypnosis, you can very easily manipulate them and plant them things in their heads that would not be there otherwise. That's why, like, to your point, you mentioned this just a second ago, that's why hypnosis is commonly thought to be successful to help people quit smoking, because all you have to do is say, like, you do not want to smoke, and the person's like, okay, cool, I don't, like, that's not a real memory of theirs. That's not a real thought or feeling. They do, their body does want to smoke, but you told them that they don't, therefore they don't. So
Okay.
it's extremely problematic as a source of trauma treatment and quote unquote therapy, because it is so unreliable and it's unclear whether the person's memories are their own or something that the therapist gave them.
That seems so dangerous, especially when it comes to trauma therapy and someone who doesn't have experience with it trying to administer it. Okay, I see where this is going, I think.
Right. You definitely do. Yes.
Okay.
There are over 600 hours of recordings of their sessions doing this specific treatment. Yeah, that's a lot. That's a fucking lot of hours. During which you can hear her disclose all of the quote-unquote repressed memories of satanic ritual abuse that she experienced as a child. She claimed that she had vivid memories of being forced by her mother to be part of a satanic cult in Victoria when she was just 5 years old. And while she was in this cult, she said that she just wanted to leave, but they wouldn't let her leave. And she was scared of her mom because she was making her be in this cult. And she was forced to endure sadistic rituals, physical abuse, and torture. She claims to have witnessed multiple murders in the form of human sacrifice, as well as the ever famous animal sacrifice. She also recounts numerous experiences where she could physically see demonic apparitions appear like right in front of her. There was one final ritual that she was a part of, and she said that that was the one where she was saved by the Virgin Mary. In this unlocked memory, she states that the Virgin appeared to her and healed all of her scars that she had gotten from all of the ritual abuse. And she also wiped her memory. So Michelle wouldn't be able to recount any of the information until the hypnosis that Lawrence performed. So this was a miracle, basically. She was saved by the Mother of God. Lawrence had uncovered something astonishing and important, and the rest of the world just needed to know that these horrible things were done to this little girl because other small children could be in danger too. And last episode, you asked, like we brought up, why were all these parents specifically scared of the kids and not each other? Like, no parent seemed in danger of falling victim to Satan. It's like everyone was like, we gotta save the kids. Here we are kind of figuring out why. Like, the image of this teeny little 5-year-old experiencing this satanic brutality is a very evocative thing. And that was why everyone was immediately like, the kids, you know, it was her. Like, it was the image of like, well, that could be my 5-year-old, you know?
Could you remind me, when did this book come out? Like, when did this go public?
1980. It was
1980.
published.
Okay, cool.
Yes.
Cool. Thank you.
So all of the stories we've told thus far are all happening at the same time, like very overlap. This is not a chronological thing. This is happening in 1980. So they write the book together as therapist and patient, and they're like, you know, we got to go out. We got to tell everyone. Published in 1980, and they are now on this extensive media marketing campaign to spread the word. It is marketed as a true story and presented as an official documented case of satanic ritual abuse, also known as SRA, which is a phrase Lawrence coined in the book that would be widely and heavily used throughout the Satanic Panic and even still to this day. I've said it already a bunch. I just didn't cite the fact that this book is where that phrase started gaining traction and actually became part of the lexicon. So, according to the book specifically, Michelle had been repeatedly locked in cages and forced to eat human flesh. Ugh, gross. And bathe in blood. So gross. So sorry. Trigger warning for myself. I forgot that was in there. Anyway, it also stated that there was a giant 13-month-long ritual that Michelle was forced to take part in while she was like in captivity with this church. Again, all of this started happening at the age of 5, and it was never explicitly said how long the cult abuse lasted. But according to the book and just the timeline it presented, it had to have been at least over a year. And based on everything that was included, seemed like it was much longer, but timeline wasn't super coherent. But it was said that it started at the age of 5. That was, we know for sure. So they're sharing these stories while they're on the media tour, which included a lot of prominent talk shows and news outlets, including, but not limited to, the tabloid news show Geraldo Rivera, everyone's favorite daytime program, Oprah Winfrey, and our old pals at 2020. So,
okay.
I was already researching this when we were recording the last episode, so if I was a little ragey, it's just I've been getting a lot of 2020 lately. Been getting a lot of satanic messages from that outlet. So all of this costs money. All of this travel to and fro to all of these places costs a lot of money. However, was this itty-bitty book able to fund such a marketing campaign? That's a great question, which has a pretty straightforward answer. And the answer is their main source of marketing funding came from the Catholic Church.
Yes.
Yes. Capital T, capital C, capital C. The Catholic Church.
Took a cup.
So, that's what I always say. So not only did they consult with local priests during the writing of Michelle Remembers, but the church really loved the fact that ultimately the message in their story was basically don't stray from God or Satan will get you. You know, that the Catholics love that shit. So they were fully on board. Someone who was not fully on board was Anton LaVey, our old friend from part 1, who was the founder of the Church of Satan. Anton LaVey created the Church of Satan in 1966. As a recap, if you forgot from part 1 or haven't tuned in, he was pissed about Michelle Remembers, and he was so mad at the way it was marketed and just the fact that it was written as a quote-unquote true story in the first place. Very shortly after the book's publication, LaVey and the Church of Satan sued Michelle, Lawrence, and Macmillan Publishing, who published the book, for defamation and libel that had resulted in a loss of reputation. He had gone, LaVey, I know, right?
Well, the idea of and
I'll get into it. I'll get into why, yes, 100%. Like, that is the accurate response. It sounds silly. It sounds like a cartoon. Right. This father of Satan is suing these, bad Catholics for being mean. You know what I mean? Yeah, it sounds ridiculous. But let's go into why, because I think this is important context that it's just little details that caused people to have the wrong idea of what was going on. So he had gone on record numerous times before and after this book was published, stating very clearly that it was fully against all of their tenets and rules and beliefs to force anyone to believe in anything at all. And not only is it against what they believe in to force people into their faith, but on their list of official rules of the church, one of them is literally to not harm children ever. That is literally stated in their bylaws. What are they called? Hold on, I have it written down.
Because it's the Satanist version of the 10 Commandments, right?
It's the 10 Commandments, but it is called the 11 Rules of the Earth, which I love.
Love that.
Pristine. Yeah. Love it. And you can find it on their website, churchofsatan.com, to this day. The 11 Rules of the Earth were established in 1967, so a year after their inception. And rule of the Earth, number 9, states, quote, "Do not harm little children." So from 1967, this whole, capturing kids and torturing them has been, against their faith from the beginning.
So, sorry, I have a clarifying question. So was LaVey trying to, say that Michelle is lying, or is he just saying if people did this to you, they are not members of this church?
Full on thought she was lying. Yes.
Okay, got it.
Because, probably both. Honestly, probably both. I think legally what he was saying is Satanic Church had nothing to do with what you were saying, but he knew in his heart that she was lying.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Yeah. Legally, he wasn't you're a liar.
That was the route to go down was the...
Yeah. Leave my church's name out of your mouth, basically, was the thing. So kind of both, I should say, but legally one, emotionally the other. I'll put it that way. I will say, because I have been a naysayer of a lot of religious rules due to the fact that we often see religious leaders not fucking following them in the first place. So I will take this opportunity to acknowledge that just because they do have these rules or tenets or rules of the earth or bylaws or whatever you want to call them, of course, there's always people who break the rules. I acknowledge that. The stereotype of the Satanic Church is violence, sacrifice, harming kids, all of these things. That is just not part of their practice whatsoever. That's the thing that is important to understand here. So, wait, actually, before I move on, I was going to skip past this, but I do want to share some of my other favorite rules of the earth that I found on their website.
Hell yeah.
So I'm just going to share them real quick. So number 5 states, "Do not make sexual advances unless you are given the mating signal." We love a consensual Satanist, gotta say. Number 6 says, "Do not take that which does not belong to you unless it is a burden to the other person and he cries out to be relieved."
That's an important clarification.
Yes, this is my favorite one, and I want this tattooed on my forehead. Number 11 states, "When walking in open territory, bother no one. If someone bothers you, ask him to stop. If he does not stop, destroy him." Love it.
I love that.
Love it. Yes. So, anyway, So the church sues Lawrence, Michelle, and Macmillan. The case was dismissed, citing First Amendment rights and freedom of speech, which is expected. And I will say, one of the biggest things that I remember learning when I was in school, proving a libel case is like famously difficult.
Oh, I've heard that. Yeah.
Yeah, the burden of proof for a libel case specifically is so extremely high here in the United States. It's almost laughable when people try to do it, you know what I mean? And not to like discredit it, like I would too, but it's nearly impossible. So there was no chance that the church was ever going to win this case against the book, you know? But the case getting dismissed kind of gave the public the false proof that the Satanic Church really was doing all of these things. At first, people were like, oh, they got you. Like, it was dismissed because she's telling the truth, blah, 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 blah. No one acknowledged that it was like, this type of case is so impossible to prove. You know what I mean? It wasn't because it was true. It was because it was impossible to prove that what they said is what caused their reputation to
that's
decline.
a lot of
that's
confirmation
why it's so
bias.
Right. It's so subjective, and that's why it's so hard. With that being said, the longer the book was out, the more they were talking about it, the more questions people asked, the more holes started to develop in their stories. So Michelle had originally claimed that the lack of physical evidence on her body was due to the Virgin Mary coming to save her at the end of the story, but that didn't explain the lack of evidence elsewhere. There was no verbal testimony, there was no physical evidence anywhere. Before we dive into all of that, one of the most controversial and in my opinion a hugely important part of this story is the fact that in the midst of all of this, both Michelle and Lawrence filed for divorce from their respective spouses and married each other. Yes.
Her therapist?
His
fucking client?
therapist. Her trauma therapist. Yes.
That is so unethical.
So unethical and fucked up.
What was the okay, so how long after the book was published did that happen? Guesstimate.
So I don't know when he left his wife / children. But I believe she divorced her husband in 79 and they got married in 85. So they were like together through this book tour, not legally married, but they were like an item throughout this. But I think it was secret at first, but people who knew them knew. In fact, people who knew them did know, because Michelle's sister would later go on record and say that she suspected that Michelle had always been in love with him. And at a certain point in their treatment, she says that she believes things switched and she wasn't going to him for treatment. She was going to him because she was in love with him. And there is some speculation that this breakdown or whatever, quote unquote, she had allegedly was like a dispute, like a lover's dispute of some sort. And like this trauma treatment was a way for them to continue seeing each other. That is speculation. This is like, I don't want to call it a rumor because there's some validity to that, but it is speculated, I'll say. And I will say, I just said a lot about Michelle. I want to be very clear that he is fully in the fucking wrong with this because, like, the power dynamic between a therapist and patient is so fucked from the beginning that, like, so I say, like, oh, she went to him because she was in love. It's like, well, he should never have even entertained any of this.
Yeah,
like,
the number of mistakes he has made.
Yes.
Oh,
yes.
Wow.
Yeah. So this raised a bunch of eyebrows. You know, it was like, okay, well, these two, what's the game plan here? You know, like, what are we doing? So people kind of started wondering if this whole thing was just them kind of fucking with people, and like maybe, you know, this was her way of getting his love and attention, and maybe this was his way of being her savior and all of these things. On top of that, and I want to dive into the whole him being her savior situation, not only was it speculated that this all started, way prior to her initial breakdown, and there was some sort of weird lovers thing going on. That was what was said about her side of the story. His side of the story, people who knew him said that early on, he had been inspired by the movie Sybil. Have you ever seen that movie?
Mm-mm.
Okay. So it's a movie about a very troubled woman who claimed to have 16 personalities, and it all comes to light when she works with her therapist on it. It's based on a true story, but it's largely fictionalized. It's one of those that the topic is based on a true story, but everything that happens in the movie is not true, and that was stated. But Lawrence allegedly told people that he knew after seeing this movie that he wanted to gain notoriety in the media by basically being someone who cured a Sybil.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So, was Michelle his Sybil? Sounds fucking like it. Things are already fucking sketch for a million reasons before we even get into the hard evidence that this was all likely fabricated. So, first and foremost, the first piece of evidence that none of this was true is the fact that timelines just didn't add up at all. Remember that Michelle claimed this all started when she was 5 and she was basically in captivity and wasn't allowed to see anyone or go anywhere for a huge amount of time, minimum 13 months. So she was basically off the grid and at the mercy of this cult. While there's proof that this isn't the case, specifically during that time frame, because she appears in yearbook photos and family photos, and people saw her, people experienced her. There are she was at birthday parties, she was at family she was around, she was not missing, and she showed no signs of any type of abuse. She wasn't acting weird, she didn't have any injuries or anything like that. And on top of that, the investigations that people were kind of digging into looked at other timelines. It was okay, maybe she wasn't 5, maybe she was 7 and just didn't remember. There was never a piece of time where she was missing or showed any signs of abuse or emotional damage or anything. Her entire childhood, she was accounted for and people were aware of her. You know what I mean? There was never a period of time where anything weird was going on or anyone could remember anything. Her extended family and friends and neighbors and all of that all went on record to say that nothing weird ever happened, and she never disclosed anything to them. There were times where she said she would tell people about this and they didn't believe her. Nobody could remember any discussion about Satan at all. It was not part of their world.
Mm-hmm.
Arguably one of the most damning verbal cases of verbal evidence, if you will. What is that? Verbal testimony? What do people call that? I don't know.
Verbal testimony? I don't know.
Yeah. Something someone said once that held a lot of weight is the fact that every single person who was asked about her mother described her without prompting as one of the most pious and devout Christian women they had ever met. There's a disconnect between that and the fact that her mother captured her and took her into a satanic cult. Yes.
Are we sure it was a satanic cult? Or did Michelle because maybe it was just some weird branch of Christianity that because she was 5, she didn't know any, but she was it must be Satan when she realized it older.
So that's the thing. The memory that was unlocked from when she was a child is that it was a satanic cult. And that was the other thing. There was no record of any cult at all. You know what I mean? Satanic or otherwise. They were a Christian family. They were at church every Sunday. Her mother was active in their church that they went to every Sunday. Maybe, if for argument's sake, is it possible? Well, yeah, all of this is possible, but the likelihood of it being real is dwindling. With all of that being said, her family was like fucking pissed at her for insinuating that the mother would do this to her specifically, if for no other reason than it was like, I don't remember how many kids there were. It was like 4 or 5 of them. It was like one of those old school families where everyone had too many kids. And she like, it was kind of like, well, where were we? Like, mom was home. She had 4 other kids to take care of. Like, she didn't have time to be in like underground tunnels feeding you flesh. Like, you know what I mean? It was that kind of thing. So her sister was fucking pissed. She straight up was like, you are a liar who owes this family an apology for dragging us into this mess, and like slandering mom's name basically, because it is impossible for any of this to have happened, like based on all of our memories of everything that happened. And it's like, okay, different siblings have different experiences with their childhood and relationships with their parents, but when you are saying that your mom has like kidnapped you and forced you into a satanic cult for over a year, that's a pretty big claim, especially when literally no one can corroborate it. Things just started unraveling real fast. There were also no official reports of anything happened. She had previously claimed that a lot of the ritual abuse happened in public, like in public spaces, like at parks and outside and shit. And there was never a report of anyone ever seeing anything. And that's the type of thing that, especially back in, this would have been like, what, the 60s? That's the type of thing that would be reported. You know what I mean? People didn't just let that kind of stuff slide. That would be reported for like weird behavior. And there were no police reports of anything or anyone being missing. There was never any report of anyone being like abused in this regard. There just were no other claims similar enough to hers that it was like, oh, maybe this person was part of the cult or whatever. There also were no hospital or school records of any injuries. She did say that some of the injuries she sustained were so bad that she needed medical treatment, and there was no record of that ever happening. And keep in mind, she wasn't missing from school at any point in her childhood, and no teacher ever saw anything that warranted, like, reporting to the school. And not only that, but I don't know if all of the 600 hours of recordings were made public, but pieces of the recordings can be found and listened to. And the number one thing that is important to all of this is the fact that Lawrence almost exclusively asks her leading questions. It was never, what happened to you? It was almost always like, what was your experience being in this cult? What kind of injuries did they give you? This is a thing that fucking happened in the Satanic Panic. It was never like, tell me your story. It was, this was your story, right? And she's under hypnosis. You can easily guide someone in that situation, you know? An example of this, there's a documentary about all of this, about Michelle Remembers and her and, you know, the fallout and all of this. It's called Satan Wants You. I watched it a few years ago whenever it first came out, and I was like, oh, that's weird and annoying, like, hate this. But I watched it again in preparation for this episode, and it made me so mad. Like, I missed so many things when I watched it the first time. They play some of the recordings from her quote-unquote trauma treatment, and at one point, she literally says, quote, I can't tell what's real anymore.
Like,
come on, man. Yes. So this is exactly what everyone warns about this hypnotic regression, is because, like, she literally says in the middle of this treatment, she doesn't know what's happening. You know what I mean? And this is allegedly a bunch of repressed memories. Like, maybe, again, for argument's sake, but when it all starts with leading questions and all starts with him guiding her and the knowledge that he wants to be like the hero in the story, like, possible, very much not probable.
Yeah.
You know?
Yep. Fuck Lawrence.
Yeah, fuck
that
this
guy.
So, unfortunately, despite all of the knowledge and things that would come to light later, in the midst of all of this was very much real to a lot of people. And it has gone down in history as a big catalyst for ramping up everything that happened. And it also led to one of the biggest cases to come as a result of this is the McMartin Preschool case. McMartin Preschool was a daycare / preschool founded by a woman named Virginia McMartin. And in 1983, shortly after Michelle Remembers, like they're deep in their media tour during this time, Virginia's 25-year-old grandson, Ray Buckley, worked as a teacher of the school. That year, a woman named Judy Johnson came forward and claimed that her 2-year-old son had been sexually assaulted by Ray and her estranged husband. So unrelated to the preschool, but she like accused these two different separate men of assaulting her son. So they opened an investigation into Ray and McMartin's school, as they should. Just want to go on record right now, so like no one comes for us. Want to make it very clear that any assault accusation in general, but particularly a sexual assault, particularly that against a child, should always be taken seriously and investigated immediately. Just don't want any confusion on my stance about that. But anyway, so according to her statement, Judy first started suspecting her child had been assaulted when he was having painful bowel movements one night.
Oh,
which, like,
God.
Ugh, I know. As a result, she asked him straight up if anyone had hurt him or done anything to him. Again, as all parents should if they suspect something is going on. His response to her questions is different depending on who you ask. Some people say that he did originally say no. He was okay, like nothing happened. He like didn't know what she was talking about, but she kept asking, like pushing him like back to the leading question situation and basically encouraged him to say yes to the point where he was like, fine, yeah, okay, I was hurt, whatever, you know? Mm-hmm. Others say that he just said yes right away. So we don't really know. The important thing is he said yes, and that therefore everything that happened next. So I think part of the reason it like might matter to the story is just the fact that like 2 is so young, you know what I mean? And like,
yeah,
unless you give them the language to discuss things like this or understand topics like, they're never going to fully understand a topic like that, like unless you teach them how to understand it. So like it's muddy from the start, whether he started saying no and she pushed him to say yes, or he said yes. Either way, he ultimately said yes. Like whether he was confused or not, like we don't know, but we can assume that he was confused no matter what, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Regardless, like that, he confirms that something happened to him. So she goes to the authorities with this accusation, and Ray is arrested in September 1983. After the initial accusation, she repeatedly contacted the district attorney's office over and over and over and over again. Like she just kept calling and calling and calling to continue making additional accusations that were described as just getting like weirder and weirder. Like as time went on, the accusations got stranger and stranger. And they also grew from Ray to the entire preschool staff. So it's not just about him, it's like everyone's involved. The following accusations are just a small sampling of notes that were taken from the DA's office when she called with additional accusations. Her son's name is listed in them. I'm removing the name. So anytime I say he in the following list, that means I almost just said his name. That means the son.
Okay, cool.
He is her son in this list. So again, this is just a few. I'm not reading all of it. There's a fucking ton. So she said, he describes having communion in church. A prayer similar in sound to the Lord's Prayer was recited. A goat climbed up higher, 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 then a bad man threw it down the stairs. It woke up later. Ray poked Peggy at the altar. Peggy is Ray's mom. I don't think I've said that yet. Lots of candles. They were all black. Old grandma played the piano. Lots of threats were made against him and his family. It's unclear whether it was a doll or real baby. He says it was a real baby, but the head was chopped off and the brains were burned. The red circled people in the ad, which refers to a newspaper ad for a local health club, are all familiar to him. The 3 women are witches. The man poked them all. Teachers Peggy, Babs, and Betty dressed up as witches. The person who buried him is Miss Betty. There were no holes in the coffin for him.
He got buried?
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, like according to this. So that's a lot of stuff. And there was a lot more stuff similar to that. They do get like significantly more graphic and unhinged. I think I already said that. If you're interested in learning like the full extent of accusations, it's easy to find on the internet. I had to go in the Wayback Machine for this list of notes, but that's where all the good stuff on the internet is.
Honestly,
just
yeah.
FYI. So, like, if you never use the Wayback Machine, what are you waiting for?
Yeah.
So, anyway, so Ray seemed to be the leader. It was kind of implied that he was the guy kind of leading all of these witches and all of these accusations. So he was questioned, but there was no evidence of any kind, and like his timeline's all added up on where he was and when, and you know, he had alibis and he had this, he had that. Like they weren't able to really do anything, so he was eventually released. Despite there being no evidence other than these initial accusations, a letter got sent out to over 200 parents of children who either previously attended the school or currently attended the school. And it was basically a notification letter like, hey, this guy was accused of all these things, specifically satanic ritual abuse. Did your kid ever see anything? Do you want to talk about it? Like, it was that type of thing. Right. So parents freak out. They're like, what the fuck? This was another instance of like the panic just like immediately. It's at this point that the Children's Institute International gets involved. So Children's Institute is a nonprofit organization in LA, and it's basically just like a social work office. They offer like therapy and support to kids who've experienced violence. And there was a team led by someone named Key McFarlane, and they set out to interview a bunch of children who had gone to the school to get to basically the bottom of what actually happened. Like, are these accusations real? If so, what the fuck happened? And like, to what extent did it happen? According to the interviews, many children said they were subjected to ritual murder, witnessing animal sacrifices, molestation by clowns. It said, I didn't fully understand this, but it was said they were sent away in hot air balloons, trapped in tunnels, and they all saw witches flying around.
What the fuck?
Yeah. This is another case. It is noted in every single source I looked into that McFarlane was a social worker who didn't have any form of forensic interview training. So they go into every single one of these interviews and just immediately start with the leading questions, as we have seen before. They didn't say, were you touched inappropriately? They'd ask, and this is a direct quote from like their interviews, the bad man touched you. Show me where.
What? The little kids?
For people who've never spoken to a child before, and I haven't said this, but the age range of children being interviewed was between the ages of 2 to 6 years old.
They'll just go along with it.
Listen, they'll just fucking go along with it. I literally last year at Phil's mom's birthday, Coco went into this whole big long fucking thing about how there was a drop of water on the table because the gnomes that live in the ceiling would crawl out of the cracks when no one was looking and stick their hand in the water and flick it on the table and then crawl back up before you could find them.
That's so creepy.
She's now afraid of gnomes, and she's the one who fucking said the story out of nowhere. This was prompted by nothing. Can you imagine if someone like prompted her?
I mean,
like Phil definitely fed into it. Like he was into like the whole like she's like they were having discourse about gnomes, but she's just started that. That's how children's brains work. Like they don't work that way. You can't phrase things that way.
No.
A child between the ages of 2 and 6, they don't fucking know anything about the world. If you tell them something happened to them, they have no reason not to believe you.
And
they don't know.
Like, I don't know how this ends. Like, I don't know. I'm not familiar with this case. So I'm not saying I believe the accusations or I don't believe the accusations, but I do know if you tell a 4-year-old this happened to you, right? They'll be like, yep, and here's all the details. And then they'll just spit a bunch of shit out. That's just what kids do.
They'll just make it all up. Yeah. Yes. And not only did they ask leading questions, but every single one of the children that they were talking to started out saying, no, nothing happened to me. When they said no, they continued to ask the same questions over and over again, just in different ways, until eventually the kids were like, okay, yeah, I guess that happened. Like, when you phrase it that way, yeah, it probably did. Again, these children are 2 to 6 years old.
Even grown adults, like,
I can't even get into, I can't even go down that. I'm getting itchy because yes, exactly. Yeah. Like, this is increasingly, to this day, a fucking problematic interview tactic that works to get people to say things that you want them to say. That is like a known fucking thing. Okay. So I literally need a minute. I'm sorry. I'm it's just so infuriating because it's so obvious if you look for more than a second. You know what I mean? And it's but it's one of those things that is easily well, I didn't tell them to say that. It's well, technically not, but that's not the point because you did a thing with your voice
didn't tell them
that
to
made them say that.
But you non-verbally communicated that they should say that.
100%. And this is all to say, I do have to add another disclaimer just in case, because I'm we're talking about sensitive things. This doesn't mean don't believe your children if they tell you something happened to them. Because you absolutely should. But that's why it's so important to successfully teach them the language to use and how to talk about these things. And I would argue the fact that these children said no, period, end of sentence, and they kept pushing is the version of not believing children that is dangerous. They said no, these things didn't happen, and they didn't accept that as an answer. They just kept asking them. But I'm not done with the interview tactics yet. This is the part that I'm so fucking done after I learned this. Not only did they use leading questions, not only did they repeat their questions over and over again, but they literally gave candy to the children when they admitted they were abused.
Okay, so this is just fucking out the window.
This is all fucking fake.
This is fake. There's no, fuck that. Seriously? Yeah. How did they
were rewarded? Because they knew what the fuck they were doing. They were just trying to nail people for satanic bullshit. Yes, this was all a fucking game from the beginning.
And they were using kids, little children, bitty babies.
2-year-olds can barely fucking speak.
Yeah.
I say again, have you ever talked to a 2-year-old? So we flew away in hot air balloons makes a lot more sense to me now.
Sure
you
does.
Know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So, oh God, I forgot about this part. Jesus, I'm so mad. This is such a struggle. I need a break from Satan after this, guys. I'm sorry. Okay. So over the next few years, so between 1984 and 1986, these interviews would expand to several other daycares and even just within communities and within individual families. People were panicked that they were coming for all the kids. Anytime anything even remotely strange or weird, or a child would say something weird or whatever, people were like, Satan, oh my God. Several people were implicated in the initial McMartin case, but everyone was eventually released due to a lack of evidence, except for Ray and his mom, Peggy. And his mom, I don't think I explicitly stated, his mom also worked at the school. It was a family business. She did admin or reception or something like that. So they were put on trial for these allegations. In the midst of all of this, Judy, the initial accuser, is diagnosed with schizophrenia. So what we know about it, you're asking if that mattered. No, it didn't. That had no bearing on anything. For those who don't know, what we know about schizophrenia And what we knew then, you have delusions, and they are, I'm not an expert on this. I don't want to go like too deep into it. I don't want to like misdescribe this at all, but it's hard to differentiate from your delusions versus reality. This is kind of an aside, but it's the best way that I can describe it. There is someone, I don't remember his name, but we'll share it in the show notes. I'll find it. There's a man who has a social profile. He has like TikTok, Instagram, all that. And he kind of chronicles his experience living with schizophrenia. And he has a service dog that he has trained to greet every person he sees so the man can know who is real and who is not. Like, that is how real people like seem to him. And he told a story one time about how he was in a job interview and he thought 3 people were interviewing him, but he noticed that one person kept trying to ask questions, but the other 2 would just talk over him. And finally, he chose to answer this one person's interview question, and the other 2 were like, the fuck? Who the fuck are you talking to? That person literally was not there.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So this is an anecdote about like how, I say delusional, I don't mean that in like a bad way, but like the delusions are so real that like from the beginning, all of these allegations that she made to the DA's office were very likely not coming from her son at all. It probably, like, now that we know she had schizophrenia, it's like, okay, who was telling you this? Was it someone who wasn't there? Was like, did you think your son was saying this? But it's just like too many questions. She also had a problem with alcoholism, likely as a result of the delusions and hallucinations. That is unfortunately a common problem. Like, if people don't get the treatment they need for schizophrenia, that like addiction and alcoholism is a common result of that, especially in the 80s. This is like, keep in mind, this was a long time ago. So she ended up dying as a complication from chronic alcoholism in 1986, the year before the trial started. So she never even testified.
Oh my God. Fuck.
Yeah.
All right.
Trial starts in 1987 and goes to 1990. And including all the pre-trial investigation, it is, I think to this day, if not definitely then, one of the longest and most expensive criminal cases in U.S. history. It lasted 7 years and cost around $15 million total.
7 years?
Yeah. And that's in 1986 money, which is like so much more money now.
Did the fact that she was schizophrenic come up at all in the trial? Like, how could they not?
No. That's like what is that called? I don't know. I don't think that could be submitted as evidence.
Even if it's like
some legal reason.
Like, this might be why the witness made, or not the witness, but the accuser made these allegations, could potentially be because they were delusions. Because I mean, it doesn't, just because she's schizophrenic doesn't mean that she wasn't telling the truth. Like, all the things could have been true.
Exactly.
But it seems like it would be an important caveat when considering her.
And that's why my assumption is no, because of what you just said. It's like insubstantial evidence, something like that. But in addition to that insubstantial evidence, even though over 100 children were initially interviewed, only a few of them actually testified. And their testimonies were described as, quote, being inconsistent and vague, which like makes sense. Like, these kids probably don't even remember being interviewed at that point.
Especially if it took over, like, because if you're like 5 when you get interviewed by the police, and by the time this trial's wrapping up, you're almost a teenager.
That's the thing. Like, this was several years later. At this point, like, lawyers are just coaching them on what to say. So of course it's going to be vague because I don't know what the fuck they're talking about at this point. In addition to that, no physical evidence was ever found. There were no injuries. Ray, the initial accused or whatever, I think one of the accusations was that like something with like child pornography, like tapes or, basically stuff like that. There was just never any of that ever found. No physical injuries. Timelines didn't add up. Like, just all the classic things that we've been seeing over and over and over and over with the Satanic Panic. Like, they all followed a very similar formula. Crazy accusations were made. People took them seriously, as they should. And then things didn't add up. but like damage had been done. It just kept happening over and over and over again. Peggy, Ray's mom, was acquitted due to lack of evidence, but the jury deadlocked on Ray, so he needed to go through another trial. They deadlocked again
Holy
in
shit.
the second trial, and then the DA denied a third trial. They were like, this has fucking gone on long enough and is expensive enough. So he was eventually released, but he had spent 5 years in jail at that point.
Wow.
Like throughout the trial. Yeah. So the McMartin case is widely used as basically an example of one of the most poorly handled cases in American history. It's taught in both law classes and psychology classes as just a guidebook on what not to do, because it was so mishandled from the beginning and there was too much bias throughout the entire thing. There was very clearly an agenda from the very beginning. The fallout from this case is astronomical throughout the whole trial. Of course, I've said this a million times at this point, the media was just in a frenzy. Headlines from this period were chaotic as fuck. So the public naturally panicked, and they were saying that Satanists were in their daycare. So daycares started to increase their security. If you have a child in daycare that has like cameras you can peek into throughout the day, you can thank the McMartin case for that. And I will say that's not a bad thing. I think that you should absolutely take every precaution necessary or that you can think of to protect children. The problem and the issue I do have with this is the precautions people were taking were displaced. They were going after the wrong people, full on love and increased security measure to protect kids. But like they were so afraid of Satan and these, satanic cults and all of these things. So it's like, there's other problems in the world going on that have been proven to be like bigger issues than this. Like this has been proven to be false time and time and time again. Yes, increase your security, but like make sure you're focusing on the right problem. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, one of the things that makes me sweat a little bit is this case, and others, I will say right now, others were happening around this time. We don't have time to talk about all of them. The McMartin one is kind of the cornerstone / catalyst for a bunch of daycare cases that happen. So just want to reiterate, this is just a small sample. But this case and others inspired police departments, social work offices, and therapy clinics to receive mandatory seminars on handling cases related to satanic cults.
Not mandatory seminars on cases related to children where you have to interview kids?
Yeah, or like just fucking child abuse within the home. Parents who accidentally kill their kids because they beat them too hard, or fucking the police brutality that caused the LA riots just one fucking year after this case wrapped up. Thank God those cops knew how to deal with fucking Satan.
Focus on the red guy with horns.
Yeah. I can't I'm sorry.
Let it out. Baby.
I can't. My eyebrows are sweating. So, and I'm speaking present tense now because we're now moving into 2000 through present. Okay? So, over the course of the past 20 years, we've acquired a lot of knowledge that is, in my opinion, necessary for understanding how problematic all of this was. Things like studies that have conclusively shown the fact that Lawrence and his methods are completely unethical and biased, etc. Studies that have conclusively shown the tactics that whatever their name was, McFarlane, with the kids, completely ineffective and problematic. Like time and time again, we're now in a space where we are able to study these things and we can see this was fucked from the beginning. As a result of these discoveries, many people who were either wrongfully convicted or still considered like guilty in the court of public opinion have been officially exonerated and pardoned due to these findings and these updated studies as recently as 2020. So like this is still
holy shit.
We're still apologizing for the bullshit that happened in the 80s. So yeah, I will say, despite the fact that we're all intelligent enough to identify these patterns and understand these tactics that people used to scare people back in the 80s and 90s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, I'll say, they didn't have the internet back then. I feel like this is like a thing that keeps popping up. We now do, so scary things can travel a lot faster, and we are, as we speak, in the process of seeing history repeat itself. And as you asked so brilliantly at the beginning of last episode, the catalyst was the creation of a new satanic religion. So in 2013, the Satanic Temple was founded, and it is more of a political movement, but it's got the word Satan in it, so like people don't care or notice any of that. It got people's panties in a bunch, and the same time frame between the creation of the Church of Satan and the full-on Satanic Panic of the 80s is almost identical to the creation of the Satanic Temple and the aggressive uptick in things like QAnon, satanic conspiracy theories. It is the same thing. It is the same pattern. We're seeing like the same theories that echo the same fears from the 80s. It's just, instead of satanic ritual abuse, we're now referring to satanic like child abuse rings and like kidnappings and all of that. So the call and response is the same. It's the same cycle over and over again. So like the beat goes on. It's just going to continue. I do not believe there will ever be a time in history that someone somewhere isn't panicking about Satan. It's happened since the dawn of time. Like the Salem witch trials were at their core a satanic panic. I have a whole thing about how the majority of cults in America are actually fucking Christian, and no one has ever actually found a real satanic cult, but I'm so tired that I'm not going to go into that. I'm so upset. This is just like bewildering. It's just bewildering. So as much as I wish the Satanic Panic was in the past, and we could all move forward living our most delicious satanic life filled with sin, the panic's not over quite yet, and I don't think it ever will be. And that's the end of my story. Thank you for coming.
Well, fuck.
Yeah.
You did warn me, and I still wasn't ready for it.
I did. What a journey, right?
You did.
Yeah, the first one's a little more fun, minus the suicide, but like the whole Dungeons and Dragons and metal music. Yeah.
I think
just like there's just so much. This was a small sample of everything, and it's still like,
well, great job tackling a massive fucking topic.
I'm literally dizzy. I love this topic. That's the problem. I enjoyed myself so much, but listen, my last few episodes have been a little aggressive with the things Kathryn can't stand vibes. So like, it's mostly just people not using their brains.
I think it's interesting. The part that you were saying about like the cycle that repeats over and over again, and how we're seeing a rise in this kind of stuff once again. The intersection of that with something else we've talked about previously, which is the rise in essentially the occult, like especially the feminine occult, like witchcraft and things like that. Mm-hmm. That's very interesting. I wonder if something similar to that was happening when the Satanic Panic first popped off.
So it was. So like that's the New Age era. Like, you know, all the hippies were doing yoga and like
and our
all
version
that kind of
of
stuff.
Being a hippie is then, just like being a witch.
Yeah, and then once you move into the 90s, 90s witches were like the vibe. You know what I mean? And that's when Lilith's Fair was established. You know, like little things like that. You know, a lot of that was like about women empowerment and, you know, a growing understanding of like third wave feminism and all of that kind of stuff, which feels separate from everything we just talked about. But as far as the way all of these things come to be and the public's opinions about everything that happened, it's all intertwined.
Yeah. Everything touches everything. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. That's why it was kind of hard to tell this. Like, I'm hoping it's not confusing that all of these things happened at the same time. But But it's just there's no way to describe it otherwise, you know? Otherwise, you're going to be back and forth because so fucking much was happening.
Yeah, if we did do a full chronological look at the Satanic Panic, that would be the entire podcast, and we wouldn't finish until we're like 85.
I'm sure there are podcasts out there that, in fact, I know there are Satanic Panic podcasts out there. I found a bunch.
Yeah,
exactly. That's just not today.
Not today, Satan.
Not today. Not today, Satan. Maybe tomorrow. It's a Saturday.
Oh, God.
Anyway, so thank you for coming.
So, until next time, Little Spoons, keep it cool.
And keep it creepy.